Welcome to Lily's Story channel. If you like my channel, please like and subscribe. Now the story begins. Kieran's last wish was simple, to see the ocean with his parents. A dream so small, so easy to grant. But Alpha Ronan Vale of the Obsidian Howl Pack, my mate, had never cared for us. Not for me. Not for our son. I begged him, over and over, until he finally relented, his agreement forced and begrudging. Yet, on the night before we were meant to leave, Ronan disappeared. And that same night, Kieran took his last breath, his wish forever unfulfilled. I buried our son alone. No mate stood beside me, no comforting hand to hold. Just silence and a grief so deep it swallowed me whole. Days later, the truth surfaced. Ronan hadn't left us for duty or responsibility. He had been with my sister, Adeline Leclerc, in the snow-capped mountains. Her Instagram post bled across my screen, a cruel twist of fate. I said I wanted to see the snow, and you took me thousands of miles just to find it. The words sliced through me, colder than the frost in her photo. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply packed my things, severing every tie to the life I once knew. But as I walked away, it wasn't me who broke. It was Ronan. His voice cracked, his tears fell, his pleas filled the air. But I never looked back. The pack house was never truly mine. It was supposed to be a home, a sanctuary for an alpha and his family, but Ronan Vale of the Obsidian Howl Pack had never treated it as such. His presence was a rarity, his attention fleeting. It had always been that way. Even after I bore him a son, even after Kieran grew up waiting for a father who was never truly there, Ronan remained absent. The only time I had ever begged him for something was for Kieran's last wish, to see the ocean with his parents. It wasn't much to ask, was it? A child's simple dream. And yet, I had to plead over and over, until he finally agreed. But on the eve of our departure, Ronan disappeared. He left us behind, just as he always did. That same night, Kieran took his last breath, never getting the chance to see the vast blue waves he had longed for. I buried my son alone. There was no comforting hand, no whispered words of solace from the mate who should have been by my side. Days later, I found out why he had abandoned us, not for duty, not for some pressing alpha obligation. He had been with my sister, Adeline Leclerc. She had wanted to see the snow, and Ronan had taken her thousands of miles away to find it. The proof was right there on her Instagram, a picture of them together in the snow-capped mountains, her caption piercing through my grief like a dagger. I said I wanted to see the snow, and you took me thousands of miles just to find it. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. What was the point? My son was gone, and my mate had never belonged to me in the first place. So I packed my things. I had nothing left to keep me here. But as I prepared to leave, Ronan broke down for the first time. He clung to me, his tears soaking my shoulder, his voice trembling with desperate pleas. Yet his sorrow came too late. His grief meant nothing to me now. Returning from the cemetery to the pack house felt like walking through a graveyard of memories. Kieran's laughter still echoed in my mind, his tiny hands pulling at my dress, begging for just one more bedtime story. Now the silence was deafening. Each toy I packed away, each piece of clothing I folded, felt like I was erasing him from existence. My hands trembled as I clutched his belongings, tears falling unchecked. But I couldn't stay. Not in this house. Not in this pack. Not with the man who had never truly been mine. Dragging my suitcase down the stairs, I halted when I saw Ronan carrying Adeline in his arms. She looked up at him, her hands curled around his neck, as if she belonged there. And maybe in his eyes she did. He walked past me without so much as a glance, setting her down on the couch with the kind of tenderness I had never received. Anastasia Leclerc, his voice was cold, indifferent. Is this just another one of your dramatic stunts? Adeline, feigning innocence, sighed. Anastasia, I twisted my ankle, and since Ronan said the Obsidian Howl Pack was close by, he brought me here to take care of it. You don't mind, do you? I watched as he tended to her injury, his hands careful, his touch reverent. A twisted ankle. That was all it took for him to drop everything and run to her side. I remembered when I had been injured. A rogue attack had left me with a broken leg, and in my desperation, I had reached out to him through our mind link, hoping stupidly for some concern. A broken leg isn't life or death, he had said. You already escaped the rogue. Why bother me? That was when I knew. Ronan had never cared, not for me. Not for Kieran. His wolf should have sensed his mate's pain, should have felt my suffering, but he had remained indifferent. And now, as I stood here watching him dote on my sister, the truth had never been clearer. I had never been his priority. I had never been his exception. He was forced to take me as his mate, but his heart had always belonged to Adeline. If it had been her instead of me, she would have been Luna of the Obsidian Howl pack by now. But it was me, who had given him the power to become Alpha. And still I was nothing more than a placeholder, a name on paper. Nothing in his heart. My fingers curled around the handle of my suitcase. I had made my decision. There was no turning back. At last, I spoke the words I had been rehearsing for days. Alpha, as you wish, I'm leaving. I almost slipped, almost blurted out that I wanted to sever our bond entirely, but I caught myself just in time. After all, what did our so-called mateship even mean? It had been nothing more than a rushed ceremony, a mere formality. We weren't truly married, nor had we ever built a real life together. There had been no love, no deep connection, only the bare minimum of what a bond should be. A hollow tie that had never truly been forged in the first place. Ronan didn't even bother to glance up, his full attention still on Adeline, as if we're nothing more than an unwelcome disruption in his carefully crafted world. What now? Changing your tactics? His voice was as cold as ever, laced with mockery. You think, now that you can't use your son to manipulate me anymore, you'll try using yourself instead. His words struck me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. A year ago, Kieran had been diagnosed with an untreatable illness, his frail heart, his inability to heal. Everything had pointed to a grim fate. He was just a child, too weak to shift, too fragile to connect with his wolf. Every day, his life had hung by a thread while I watched in helpless agony, knowing he was slipping further away. And throughout it all, he had only asked for one thing, to see his father. Ronan had never visited him, never shown the slightest concern. In his mind, had only ever used Kieran to gain sympathy, to guilt-trip him into caring. And now, after 10 years together, that was all I was to him, a manipulative woman desperate for attention. I blinked away the sting of tears, refusing to let him see me break. Believe whatever you want, Alpha. I'm leaving. With that, I turned on my heel, dragging my suitcase toward the door. But before I could make it out, Adeline's voice cut through the silence, feigning innocence. Alpha, didn't you plan to take Kieran to the ocean? You didn't cancel that just for the mountain trip with me, did you? Anastasia's upset. Ronan's voice was gentle, almost soothing, a stark contrast to the cold indifference he always reserved for me. Don't worry, I know my priorities. We can visit the ocean and time. But once the snow melts in the mountains, it'll be a long time before we can see it again. A bitter scoff escaped my lips, sharp and cutting. How blind could he be? How utterly oblivious to the damage he had done? He didn't know. He couldn't possibly know that there would be no next time, no next trip, no next month for Kieran. I clenched my jaw and strode toward the door, determined to leave. But before I could, Ronan moved, seizing my wrist in frustration. It's the middle of the night, Anastasia. Do you really think this is necessary? You're crying over missing one trip to the ocean? Kieran can wait. His words cut deeper than any blade. Even now, even after everything, he didn't understand. He didn't care enough to understand. His eyes flickered toward my face, finally registering the redness and swelling of my tear-streaked cheeks. For the first time, a hint of pity entered his gaze. I'll clear my schedule next month. I'll take Kieran then, all right? Next month? What next month? What future did Kieran have left? If only Ronan had cared just a little more, maybe he wouldn't be standing here, saying something so absurd. I wrenched my hand free, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. No need. Ronan stared at his empty palm, visibly stunned. He had never expected this. Never imagined that the woman who had once clung to him so desperately would now recoil from him like he was a curse. He hesitated, then made a move to follow me, but Adeline, ever the center of his universe, clutched his arm, pulling him back. Alpha, it's my fault, she murmured, her voice laced with false remorse. Shouldn't have competed for your attention. Even though I knew Kieran was faking his illness, I still... Faking? The world seemed to tilt, my breath catching in my throat. My entire body went cold. Before I could even process the words, my hand had already moved on its own. The sharp crack of the slap echoed through the room. Adeline stumbled back, her hand flying to her cheek, eyes wide in disbelief. But I didn't care. My palm tingled from the impact, but it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough to drown out the storm of rage surging inside me. Ronan's face, which had initially shown a flicker of guilt, hardened in an instant. His expression turned cold as he instinctively positioned Adeline behind him, shielding her while his eyes darkened with accusation. Anastasia, what are you doing? She's your sister. I locked eyes with Adeline, barely restraining my rage. You better watch your mouth. Adeline widened her eyes, feigning innocence as she leaned closer to my mate, her presence making my wolf bristle with unease. Alpha, I don't want to come between you two. If my sister refuses to admit that Kieran is faking his illness, then I'll just drop it. Disbelief surged through me. My brow furrowed as I turned to Ronan, my voice shaking. You think Kieran is faking it too? His silence was answer enough. He didn't believe me. He never did. Then I caught him scanning the room, his eyes searching for our son. But Kieran was nowhere in sight. Where did you hide him this time? His voice dripped with suspicion, laced with an accusation that cut me deeper than any blade. If only he came home more often, he would see the reality. The table littered with medicine bottles, the never-ending pile of medical reports from our wolf healers, the sleepless nights Kieran endured. But instead, he chose to believe Adeline's lies, the poisonous words that painted Kieran as a manipulative child rather than the sick, fragile boy he truly was. I remembered the day Kieran confided in me, his small voice trembling as he told me he didn't have much time left. His last wish was simple, to see the ocean one final time. He had always been enchanted by the sea, mesmerized by its endless waves and mysteries, a love passed down from the stories his late grandmother used to tell him. But we lived far from the coast, and the only way to make his wish come true was to get Ronan to agree. So I had begged him. No, I had humiliated myself, kneeling before him, clutching the fabric of his pants as I pleaded. Please, I had whispered, my voice breaking. This will be the last thing I ever ask of you. I swear. After this, I'll set you free. Ronan had looked down at me then, something flickering in his gaze. Was it relief? Satisfaction? I couldn't tell. You mean that? He had asked, his voice void of warmth, calculating. Yes, I had murmured, closing my eyes as tears streamed down my face, feeling the last remnants of my dignity shatter. The bitter truth was that when Ronan was young, he had lost his parents in a rogue attack, leaving him a lone wanderer. I could still recall the day I found him, a frail, half-starved boy lying unconscious on the forest floor. I had been just a child myself, playing among the trees, when I stumbled upon him. He was nothing but skin and bones, his body covered in grime, his lips cracked from thirst. My heart had clenched painfully at the sight. You poor thing, I had whispered, brushing aside the tangled strands of hair from his dirt-streaked face. You must be starving. His hollow eyes had flickered open, filled with a fear that spoke of countless nights spent alone. Something in me had fractured at that moment. I couldn't leave him there. I couldn't let him die. Reaching for his frail hand, I had pulled him up with all the strength my small arms could muster. Come with me, I had said, my voice filled with quiet determination. I'll take care of you. When I brought him home, my parents, Alpha Theron and Luna Fay Leclerc of the Obsidian Howl Pack, had been wary. My father's stern voice still echoed in my memories. Anastasia, he's a stranger. But I had refused to back down. Please, father, I had begged, desperation tightening my throat. He has no one else. If we don't help him, he'll die. My mother, always the gentler soul, had looked at Ronan with quiet pity. Theron, she had murmured, placing a hand on my father's arm. He's just a child. Even then, my father had hesitated, his expression unreadable. He had not been easily swayed. And so, I had done the only thing I could think of. I went on a hunger strike. For days, I refused to eat, growing weaker with each passing moment. But I had remained steadfast, determined to prove that I would not relent until they agreed. Eventually, my father had sighed in resignation. All right, Anastasia, he had said, his voice laced with reluctance. We'll take him in. That day, I had thought Ronan became my brother, or so I had believed. When I turned 18, everything shifted. My father, consumed by ambition for power and territory, began to disregard my mother, who had once been just an ordinary she-wolf before becoming Luna. He sought out the daughter of a powerful alpha from another pack, lured by the promise of dominance and prestige. Without hesitation, he cast my mother aside, rejecting her as his mate, and instead bonded with this other woman, ultimately claiming the position of alpha in the Phantom Moon pack. That was the kind of man he was, selfish beyond measure. Without looking back, he abandoned us. You and Adeline should come with me, he had said, his voice void of affection or concern. There's nothing for you here. But I couldn't leave my mother behind. I'm staying with Mom, I had responded with unwavering resolve. She needs me. Adeline, however, was different. She craved the status, the influence, the life that came with our father's new rank. Without hesitation, she chose to follow him, leaving me and our mother behind without so much as a second thought. I watched her leave that day, standing at the very edge of our pack's borders. Adeline, I had called out, my voice raw with desperation. Don't go. She had turned back only once, her gaze distant and devoid of warmth. This is our opportunity, Anastasia, she had said, her tone eerily detached. I'm not wasting it. In the years that followed, I became the target of Ronan's resentment. He blamed me for everything, for keeping him from following Adeline, for trapping him in the Obsidian Howl pack, for holding him back from the future he thought he deserved. And when I became his mate, his hatred for me only deepened. As a child, I had always admired Ronan, trailing after him like his shadow. I adored him. He was my world. So when I turned 18 and discovered that he was my mate, I was overjoyed. I thought it was fate, that we were meant to be together. But Ronan didn't see it that way. The moment I told him we were mates, his reaction crushed me. No, he had said, his voice cold and final. This isn't right. I was supposed to be with Adeline. His words shattered me. Ronan, please, I had begged, tears streaking down my face. We're fated to be together. You can't just leave me. But he had been ready to walk away, prepared to abandon me, to follow Adeline and pledge himself to the Phantom Moon Pack. Then my mother fell ill, and on her deathbed she made Ronan swear an oath, to stay by my side, to protect me as his fated mate. Out of obligation to the woman who had raised him, he agreed. But in his heart, I knew he resented her for binding him to me, for forcing him to remain where he didn't want to be. And after my father's departure, leadership of the pack fell to me. Even then, I knew how much Ronan craved power, so I willingly handed him the title of Alpha, content to serve as Luna in the background. Yet, despite our bond, despite everything, he never once announced me as his Luna. One day I confronted him. Ronan, I had asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Why haven't you acknowledged me as your Luna? His response was a dagger straight to my heart. Your mother forced me to mate with you. And now you expect me to make you Luna too? Keep dreaming, Anastasia. That title will always belong to your sister. His words wounded me deeper than any physical attack ever could. At that moment I knew, I was nothing to him. I had no place in his heart. That space had always been reserved for Adeline. But I had one last plea, one final desperate wish. Kieran's trip to the ocean. I was ready to set Ronan free, to finally let him go. But even then he refused to grant me that one moment of peace. He could never love me. I had come to accept that. But how could he be so cruel to Kieran? How could he turn his back on his own son? I fixed my gaze on Ronan, my emotions a storm of disappointment and fury. The man who had once seemed as flawless as a masterpiece now only filled me with revulsion. Those eyes, once a source of comfort, once softened by affection, were now nothing but cold and unyielding. I had always found warmth in them, but now they served only as a cruel reminder of the distance between us. Before I could speak, Adeline's voice sliced through the tension. Alpha, my foot hurts, and so does my face. Can you check if it's swollen? I'm worried it might ruin my appearance for tomorrow's Alpha gathering. Ronan's attention shifted instantly, his concern for her unmistakable. He cradled her in his arms with the kind of tenderness that once belonged to me. Adeline took full advantage of it, leaning into him like a delicate porcelain doll. My slap had left a red imprint on her pale cheek, and her eyes brimmed with artificial tears. Watching him wipe them away so gently was a cruel reminder of what we had lost. I could still recall the younger version of him, the boy who had been kind to me, who had helped me up when I fell, who had wiped away my tears with the same gentleness he now reserved for Adeline. The realization that those moments were nothing but distant memories now, replaced by this twisted spectacle, was almost unbearable. Anastasia, Ronan's voice rang out, devoid of the warmth it once held. Apologize to your sister. Lifting my chin, I straightened my posture, my resolve unshaken. No. My voice was firm, defiant. The sheer audacity of my refusal seemed to catch him off guard. For a brief moment, he looked as if he couldn't quite recognize me, as if the girl who had once loved him so openly was a stranger now. The irony didn't escape me. When I had loved him, I had always been so careful, so measured in my actions, so desperate for his approval. I had offered him my heart, hoping that if I gave enough of myself, he would finally see me. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. I could never compare to Adeline in his eyes. Ronan's momentary surprise hardened into determination. He leaned back on the couch, Adeline nestled in his arms, his gaze locking onto me with unsettling ease. Anastasia, don't test my patience, he warned. His wolf guards, who had been silent observers until now, stepped forward. Without a word, they moved to block my path, their presence a clear command. They ushered me back in front of Ronan and Adeline, their movements sharp and authoritative. Ronan remained at ease, his posture deceptively relaxed. But the air around him was suffocating, charged with unspoken threats. Crossing one leg over the other, he regarded me with an unnerving calm. "Apologize," he repeated, his voice carrying the weight of an order. Adeline, ever the performer, flashed me a smirk before turning to Ronan with feigned sweetness. "It's okay, Alpha. Anastasia didn't mean it." Ronan's gaze softened, filled with what could only be pity and affection. "Adeline, you're too kind. You treat her like a sister, but she's never seen you that way." Then his attention snapped back to me, and any trace of gentleness disappeared, his expression turned to ice, his words sharp as a blade. "Anyone who harms Adeline will pay the price double." A memory surfaced in my mind, one from years ago when I had been cornered by young wolves from a rival pack. Ronan had appeared like a guardian angel, fighting them off with unwavering determination. Back then he had stood by my side, my protector. But now, the same man who had once shielded me was standing against me, his loyalty placed elsewhere. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. The man who had once meant everything to me was now determined to break me. His expression was merciless, his resolve absolute. With a silent command, he signaled the guards. They stepped forward, grabbing me roughly, forcing me onto my knees before him and Adeline. My wolf howled within me, her fury and anguish mirroring my own. I felt her fighting to break free, but I held her back, unwilling to lose control. One of the guards raised his hand, ready to strike me. Just before the blow could land, Adeline's voice cut through the tension, dripping with artificial concern. "Alpha, she's still my sister. Men can be too harsh. I wouldn't want them to hurt her." Ronan turned to her, his expressure betraying the slightest hint of approval. "If she truly needs to be punished," Adeline continued, her voice sickly sweet, "then let me do it myself." Ronan made no attempt to intervene. A cruel smirk played on Adeline's lips as she lifted her hand and struck me twice, her nails slicing into my cheek and leaving behind searing pain and thin rivulets of blood. Turning to Ronan, she feigned distress, her voice laced with insincere concern. "Alpha, what should we do? I've harmed Anastasia." Ronan merely scoffed, unimpressed by her act. "She brought this upon herself, Adeline. You're too soft-hearted, worrying about her when she was the one who hurt you first." The guards loosened their grip and crumpled to the floor, my body aching from both the blows and the impact. As I lifted my gaze to meet Ronan's, fury burned in my eyes. His next words, however, sent a fresh wave of outrage crashing over me. "Anastasia, you owe Adeline an apology," he declared, his voice sharp and unyielding. "Owe her?" The very thought was absurd. She was the one who had spread vicious lies about my son, Kieran. The injustice of it all churned inside me, boiling over in a fury I could no longer suppress. My voice dripped with venom as I scoffed. "In your dreams. I despise you." For the first time, I met Ronan's GA without an ounce of the affection that Hack once resided there. What had once been admiration had now solidified into pure, unwavering hatred. A flicker of something unreadable passed through his expression. Annoyance, perhaps, but tinged with an unfamiliar softness. "Anastasia," he began, his tone shifting, "just listen to me and you can have anything you desire. I can be there for your son. I can even make you my Luna." His words felt like a cruel mockery of the past. I had once dreamed of standing at his side, of holding the title of Luna with pride. But the reality had been starkly different. While I had hidden in the shadows, he had paraded Adeline before the world as his true mate, his unwavering companion in the presence of other alphas and their packs. I had been nothing more than a secret, a forgotten whisper in his life. And now, when I no longer wished for what he dangled before me, he wielded it as a means to bend me to his will. The sting of Adeline's slap still burned, but I refused to let it show instead. I met Ronan's gaze head-on, my voice steady and resolute. "There's no need, Alpha. We're finished." Shock flickered in his eyes, as if my rejection was something beyond comprehension. A slow, derisive smirk curled on his lips. "What's this? No longer running to me, pretending you need me just so I can entertain your son." His words dripped with malice, but before I could respond, Adeline spoke, her voice thick with mock sympathy. "Anastasia, stop trying to deceive Alpha Ronan. If Kieran were truly dying, why would you be here alone?" That was the final straw. My patience snapped like a brittle thread. "Shut up. You have no right to say his name." Adeline's expression wavered into one of feigned hurt, but the glint of satisfaction in her eyes remained. "Okay, I won't bring him up anymore," she murmured, her tone laced with false innocence. "Please don't be mad at me, Anastasia." Her crocodile tears didn't fool me. "But Ronan, clearly provoked by my reaction, let out a cold, humorless chuckle. He moved with deliberate slowness, reaching into his pocket and retrieving his phone as if savoring the moment, as if preparing to strike a fatal blow. With a smirk, he dialed a number and placed the call on speaker. His voice carried a chilling command. Beta Magnus, find out everything about Anastasia's son, especially his exact location. If he's receiving treatment in the Pax infirmary, cease it immediately. The air thickened with tension, heavy with the weight of his threat. His gaze never wavered from mine, watching me like a predator savoring the torment of its prey. He expected me to break, to crumble. Instead, I held his gaze, my lips curving into a grim, defiant smile. Then Beta Magnus' voice crackled through the speaker, delivering a blow that neither of us had anticipated. Alpha Ronan, Kiran is gone. He passed away the day after you vanished. How is that possible? Ronan's voice was a mixture of disbelief and irritation. His gaze darted between me and his phone as if the device itself had betrayed him. Beta Magnus, you've grown bold, conspiring with Anastasia to deceive me. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Ronan ended the call abruptly, the harsh click of his phone hanging in the air. The screen soon lit up with details about Kiran's funeral arrangements and the cemetery address. Ronan's face drained of color as he absorbed the information. His eyes widened, fixated on me with an intensity that bordered on horror. Such a big deal. Why didn't you tell me? I couldn't help but laugh, a harsh, bitter sound. How could I tell you? The night before our trip to the ocean, you turned off your phone, ignored my mind links, and vanished from the Obsidian Howl Pack's territory. I searched for you everywhere. My voice trembled, betraying the rawness of my hurt. Ronan's eyes flickered with something that might have been regret, a rare glimpse of shame behind his hardened exterior. If you had told me beforehand. I cut him off, my patience eroding. Haven't I told you enough? Every time it was Kiran's birthday, every single occasion, every time he was discharged from the Pax infirmary. How desperately he longed to see his father. A knot tightened in my chest as I recalled Kiran's hopeful eyes. His attempts to reach Ronan had been relentless. Initially, Ronan offered excuses, promising to visit Kiran soon. But as time wore on, he stopped returning Kiran's calls altogether, his attention consumed by his duties with Adeline and attending meetings with other Pax to solidify alliances. Kiran, confined to his bed, would excitedly talk about the meetings he'd heard of from the Pack members and some warriors he got close to who often accompanied his alpha of a father, asking, "Is Dad in those cool meetings again?" The lie of reassurance I offered him was a constant source of pain. Kiran had only seen his father a handful of times, and those memories had faded. He could barely recall what Ronan looked like. Ronan's gaze softened slightly, a flicker of guilt in his eyes. I thought Kiran was just like your mother, using his illness to manipulate me into coming home. I couldn't contain the anger that surged through me. You thought I was manipulating you. Every time Kiran's symptoms worsened, when the healers were baffled, I reached out to you. You came once, but after seeing the reports, you convinced yourself I was scheming. No matter how many times I tried to contact you, you refused to believe me. Ronan's expression was a mask of disbelief. He was fine when I saw him last. I let out a hollow laugh, the sound echoing in the room. Last time? Alpha, don't joke around. That was nearly 2 years ago. Do you even remember what he looked like? Ronan's lips pressed into a thin line, unable to offer a retort. The weight of my words seemed to sink in, and for the first time, he appeared somewhat remorseful. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out to wipe the tears that streamed down my face. "I'm so sorry about this," he murmured, his voice tinged with regret. I recoiled, swatting his hand away with a mixture of anger and despair. Sorry. Was that all he had to offer after Kiran's tragic death? I looked into his eyes, searching for a deeper understanding. But none. "Oh, please," I said, my voice dripping with icy sarcasm. "Now our high and mighty Alpha Ronan is saying sorry." Ronan's face shifted, his confidence faltering as he sensed the depth of my scorn. "Anastasia," he said, his voice tinged with desperation. "There's no way to bring him back to life, but I can make it up to you. If you want to get married and be my Luna, we can arrange it for tomorrow. I'll announce your position in the Pack." The absurdity of his offer struck me like a blow. He thought a marriage proposal and a title could somehow compensate for Kiran's death, for the years of neglect and heartbreak. My eyes narrowed, the contempt clear. "No need, Alpha," I replied coldly. "We're done." Ronan's frustration boiled over, his voice sharp with anger. "Anastasia, why are you so stubborn? Isn't this what you've always wanted?" His words cut deep, but I stood my ground. He was right. I had wanted this, desperately foolishly. For years, my only obsession had been to become his Luna. I loved him so much that I lost my self-respect, so much that I stayed by his side without a title, even while carrying our child. I had loved him so much that I let him lead the pack that was meant to be mine. And even when the whispers and rumors about him and Adeline filled the pack, I never dared question him. My love for him had become a burden, exhausting me and leaving me hollow. I no longer had the strength to continue this endless, suffocating entanglement. With a heart that felt like it was breaking, I finally turned away from him and the pack house that had once been my home. Ronan stood frozen, his gaze burning into my back as I walked away, as if he couldn't believe I was truly leaving. But this time I didn't look back. The villa that bore my name awaited me just outside the pack's territory, nestled in a secluded town. It had been a gift from my late mother before she passed away, a place that now felt like a refuge for my wounded soul. The moment I stepped inside and fixed my luggage, the memories of Kieran overwhelmed me. His clothes, his toys, his favorite books, they all haunted me as soon as I saw his things inside my luggage. I brought everything from the pack house, every little thing that reminded me of Kieran. His favorite things were the small blanket he used to carry around, and even the drawings he made of the three of us, me, him, and a faceless figure that was supposed to be his father. They were all here, surrounding me, suffocating me, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't accept that Kieran was truly gone. The pain was too much, a raw, festering wound that refused to heal. I shut myself away in the villa, the world outside ceasing to exist. Days blurred together as I cried until my eyes were too dry to shed any more tears. Time lost all meaning. I ate when the gnawing hunger became unbearable, and slept when exhaustion claimed me. But more often than not, I was neither hungry nor tired. My wolf, usually a comforting presence, had retreated deep within me, her grief mirroring mine. The bond we shared, once so strong, now felt distant and strained, as if she too had given up. Eventually, my body couldn't take the strain. I collapsed, the world spinning into darkness. My last thoughts were bitter. There was no one left who cared for me, no one to mourn if I died alone in this place. It seemed fitting in a twisted way. Perhaps I would finally find peace. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. When I finally awoke, the sterile scent of antiseptic filled my senses, my eyes fluttered open. And I recognized the surroundings instantly, the infirmary of the Obsidian Howl Pack. The memories of Kieran struggling to breathe and coughing weakly came rushing back, choking me with their intensity. Ronan was there, sitting beside the bed. He was silent, his expression unreadable as he watched me. The moment he saw I was awake, he didn't say a word. Instead, he called for the wolf healer, his voice soft yet commanding. Shortly after, Beta Magnus arrived with a bowl of oatmeal, my favorite. It was the same comfort food I used to crave when I was sick, back when my mother was alive. I glanced at Ronan, the memories of the past too painful to ignore. I remembered how, when I was ill as a child, I'd beg him to make oatmeal for me. He would scowl, always reluctant, but in the end, he'd bring it to me with a gruffness that belied his care. I used to cling to him then, laughing as I teased, "You're the best brother." He'd look away, ears red, and feed me with that same reluctant tenderness. Back then, my heart had fluttered with hope, foolishly believing he might have felt something more for me. Later, he shattered that illusion. He confessed it was all because my mother had forced him. It was all just my wishful thinking. Now, as he sat beside me, I didn't know why he was here, why he was taking care of me. But I wasn't going to let myself fall into the same trap again. When he offered me the oatmeal, I turned away, refusing to take it. The spoon clattered noisily against the bowl as he set it down, his patience fraying. "Anastasia, look at how thin you've become," he said, his voice edged with concern but also something darker, frustration perhaps. "All this," he continued, his tone harsh, "for that man's child. Is it really necessary?" As his words echoed through the room, I felt the air leave my lungs. That man's child, the disbelief in my voice was palpable. Ronan, my first and only man, stood before me, accusing me of betrayal. The audacity of it stunned me. My thoughts drifted to that fateful day when Adeline visited the Obsidia Hellpack. It was the day of our mateship ceremony, a day that should have marked the beginning of a new chapter in our lives. Instead, it had been marred by deceit and misunderstandings. Ronan had returned to the pack house drunk that night. He'd begged me not to leave, his pleas desperate and frantic, and in that moment my resolve crumbled. We spent the night together, tangled in sheets that were supposed to symbolize our union. The next morning, he awoke, and the reality of our situation hit him like a ton of bricks. We were officially mated, bound by a bond that should have been sacred. But instead of warmth and affection, his eyes were filled with disgust as they roamed over the marks he'd left on my body. Maybe he thought I was Adeline last night when he was drunk. You knew I loved Adeline, yet you threw yourself at me, he spat. Kieran came into our lives soon after a blessing I had hoped would bring us closer. But Ronan never saw it that way. He believed I used our child to tie him down, to trap him in a life he never wanted. But today his words cut deeper than any before. It wasn't just disdain he held for Kieran, it was doubt, suspicion. He didn't just dislike our son, he doubted his very bloodline. The absurdity of it all made me laugh, a bitter sound that echoed in the small room. I met Ronan's gaze, my voice trembling with a mix of fury and heartbreak. Then tell me, whose child is he? His face darkened, and he slammed the bowl he was holding onto the table, the clang resonating in the silence. You know perfectly well. I don't want to argue with you. But I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream until my voice gave out, to make him see the truth that he had been so blind to. But before I could say another word, his eyes glazed over. A mind link. Adeline. I could always tell when it was her. Without another word, he left, the door slamming shut behind him. I couldn't stay in the Pax infirmary any longer. The memories of Kieran, of his final moments in my arms, haunted every corner of that place. Back at the villa, I turned on my phone, only to see the barrage of missed calls from Ronan. It was no wonder he had found me once again, standing at my door, his face tense with worry. He knocked late in the night, the sound jolting me from my thoughts. When I opened the door, his expression softened with relief. Why are you always running away? Don't you know you're weak right now? His concern grated on me. What does it have to do with you? We're nothing to each other anymore. Ronan's lips pressed into a thin line. Frustration was evident in every tense muscle. I was wrong about Kieran's issue. Can we stop fighting about it? His voice softened, almost pleading. We lost him, but we can have our children in the future. Our children? The mere suggestion made my blood run cold. Kieran was irreplaceable. I stared at Ronan, my voice dripping with contempt. Go on, if he's not your child, then who is his father? His response was immediate, his tone accusatory. Do I need to spell it out? Who else could it be if not Alpha Atlas Alcons? Atlas. The name hung in the air. The memory of that day flashed before my eyes. After our wedding, after Ronan's cruel words, I had fled the pack, seeking peace of mind in the anonymity of a nearby town. I found myself at a small inn, drowning my sorrows in a glass of cheap alcoholic drink. The same day I was harassed, not knowing what to do. That's when Atlas appeared, the alpha of a powerful pack that rivaled even Ronan's and Phantom Moon pack. His presence had always been commanding, even as a child, and now, as a grown man, he exuded an aura of strength that was impossible to ignore. His dark hair, always a little too long, fell into his piercing blue eyes, eyes that seemed to see right through me. His chiseled jawline, the strong set of his shoulders, everything about him screamed authority. Atlas had helped me that day, stepping in when a drunken stranger had harassed me. He had driven me back to Obsidian Howl. I never thought much of it, but now Ronan was twisting it into something ugly. Ronan, I said, my voice laced with defiance, on what basis are you saying this? He sneered, stepping closer until I could feel the heat of his body against mine. His hand gripped my wrist tightly, and he pinned me against the door, his eyes wild with anger. The day after our wedding, you went out of the pack and went to a nearby town, right? My mind raced back to that morning, the pain of his rejection still fresh in my memory. I had sought escape, not an affair. But Ronan's mind was made up. Adeline saw you and him enter a private room in that inn and leave together. Adeline. Of course, it had been her. The realization made my stomach churn. She had always been in the background. Anastasia, it was right after our mateship ceremony, and you weren't even discreet. Greedy, wanting it all. And to think I believed. Whatever he believed, I didn't care. I didn't want to hear it. The man before me was no longer the one I had loved so fiercely. He was a stranger, twisted by his own insecurities and the manipulations of those around him. I shoved him away with all the strength I could muster. So you think Kieran isn't your biological child? He looked at me, his eyes hard and unyielding. Isn't he? Which part of him looks like me? The absurdity of his question made my blood boil. Babies all looked somewhat alike when they were young. How could he see any difference? But arguing with him was pointless. And damn, if only he came to see Kieran once in a while, he would have never thought of those things. But he didn't even bother to look for him in 2 years. I turned away from him, walking to the bedroom where I kept the last remnants of Kieran. From the drawer, I retrieved his used toothbrush and a small plastic bag containing strands of his hair that had fallen out during his medications. I held them out to Ronan, my voice flat and emotionless. Take these and find out for yourself. As I approached the villa, a familiar scent of pine and rain lingered in the air, Ronan's scent. My heart, hardened by loss, remained unmoved as I opened the door, only to find him slumped against the doorframe. His appearance was a stark contrast to the proud alpha he once was. He looked a decade older, his once-groomed beard now unkempt, and his eyes bloodshot, reflecting the torment that had taken root deep within him. Around him, a trail of cigarette butts lay scattered, the air thick with the acrid smell of smoke. Anastasia. His voice was hoarse, filled with a desperation I hadn't heard before. I didn't know Kieran was my son. He reached out, grabbing the hem of my skirt like a man clinging to the last vestiges of hope. But my heart remained cold, untouched by his pleas. How could he expect forgiveness when he hadn't even given Kieran a chance? How could he doubt his own flesh and blood? You didn't know. I echoed, my voice sharper than the wind outside. You thought he wasn't your child, and you didn't even bother to find out. You just assumed he wasn't yours. He flinched as if my words had struck him like a physical blow. Regret filled his eyes, an emotion too late to make any difference. I was afraid, he admitted, his voice trembling. Afraid of what the investigation might reveal. Afraid that Kieran was really Alpha Atlas's son. Alpha Atlas? His name in Ronan's mouth was almost laughable. I hadn't seen Atlas since the day he helped me fend off a drunken harasser in a town far from our pack. Our paths had crossed only by coincidence, yet here Ronan was, using that one moment as fuel for his insecurities. You were afraid I'd run off with Atlas? I asked, my tone incredulous. Didn't you already push me away? Didn't you already have Adeline? He looked down, unable to meet my gaze, his hands trembling as they hung limply by his sides. The truth was, his fears had no foundation, just as our relationship had none. But it no longer mattered. The one thing that could have bridged the gap between us, our son, was gone, and no amount of remorse could change that. It doesn't matter anymore, I said, my voice hollow. Kieran was gone. No truth, no revelation, no apology could bring him back. Anastasia, please, he begged, his voice cracking under the weight of his guilt. I'll do anything you want. If you want to marry me, I'll marry you. If you want my life, it's yours. The once proud Alpha, reduced to a man begging for scraps of forgiveness, was a pitiful sight. But his humility did nothing to soften my heart. Instead, it reminded me of the countless nights I had spent in tears, wishing for him to see me. To see Kieran, only to be met with indifference and scorn. I want my obsidian hell pack back, I said firmly. Ronan's eaves widened in shock. This was not the request he had expected. But I had dreamt of Kieran. In that dream, he had asked me to live well, to go out and see the world. For Kieran's sake, I would step out of the shadows that had plagued my life. He hesitated, his eyes searching mine for some sign of hesitation, but there was none. Finally, he nodded. Ronan had always misunderstood the dynamics between my family and him. He had held a grudge against me and my mother, believing that we had kept him in the pack for selfish reasons. He thought that we had prevented him from joining the Phantom Moon pack, a more powerful pack that he had longed to be part of. He didn't know that it was my father, Alpha Theron, who had stood in his way, threatened by the possibility that Ronan might one day take his title. To protect Ronan from this harsh truth, I had kept silent, even giving him the title of Alpha of Obsidian Howl Pack to appease his ambitions. Ronan had mistaken my actions for manipulation, believing that I was trying to trap him and that my mother had used our mateship to bind him to the pack. He had refused to marry me until after my mother's death, convinced that he was nothing more than a pawn in our game. Little did he know, it was my father who had never wanted him there at all. But now it was time to untangle the mess. The next morning, Ronan called a pack meeting, summoning every member of Obsidian Howl to the Grand Hall. The air was thick with tension as the pack gathered, whispers of speculation running through the crowd. They had no idea what was coming. Ronan stood tall before them, though the weight of his decision was evident in the set of his shoulders. His voice, however, was steady and authoritative, the voice of an alpha who had made his choice. From this day forward, he declared, his voice echoing through the hall. I, Ronan Vale, relinquish my title as Alpha of the Obsidian Howl Pack. I pass this title to Anastasia Leclerc, the rightful heir of former Alpha Theron Leclerc. She is your Alpha now, and you will obey her and bow to her authority as you once did mine. Gasps of shock rippled through the crowd, but I remained still, my face betraying none of the emotions swirling within me. Ronan had handed me the pack, and with it, the burden of leadership. Back then, I could barely step into the Alpha's office without feeling out of place now, as I stood in what was now my office. Beta Magnus, always loyal, brought me the lunch coming from Ronan every day, encouraging me to eat amidst the endless paperwork that now consumed my days. On some days, Ronan would go to talk to me himself. You don't have to do this alone, you know. We don't have to separate. Isn't it easier not to sever the mate bond? It will only hurt you. Ronan stood before me in the Alpha's office, the same office that had once belonged to my father. Anastasia, he began, his voice softer than usual, almost hesitant. I missed the days when you called me by my nickname, Lon. The one you gave me when we were just kids. I froze. Memories flooded back, unbidden, of a time when we were young and full of dreams. When I had first realized my feelings for him, I had called him Lon back then, a name only I used, one that held a world of unspoken affection. Lon, I had once said, my voice trembling with the weight of my confession. I have something to tell you. But before I could finish, his response had cut through me like a knife. Don't call me that, he had sneered, his tone dripping with disdain. It makes me sick. The love letter I had clutched in my hand remained undelivered, crumpled, and forgotten as my heart shattered at that moment. From that day forward, I never called him Lon again. Now, standing in the same office, I met his gaze with a cold, unwavering stare. Don't call me Anastasia, I said, my voice as icy as the night air outside. It makes me sick. Call me Alpha. Ronan's eyes widened in shock, the memory of his past cruelty flashing across his face. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say a word, the door to the office swung open. Adeline stood in the doorway, her figure as poised as ever. She looked between us, her eyes narrowing slightly as she took in the scene. Alpha, she began, her voice smooth and practiced. Weren't we supposed to attend the Alpha gathering together? What are you doing here? Her words trailed off as her gaze landed on me sitting at the Alpha's desk, Ronan standing before me. The tension in the room was palpable, and for a moment, none of us moved. Ronan's eyes flickered with uncertainty as he looked at me as if searching for a hint of jealousy or anger, but I remained indifferent, focusing on the meal in front of me, refusing to be drawn into their unspoken drama. What are you doing here? Ronan's voice was laced with annoyance as he turned to Adeline, his brow furrowing in frustration. My sister forced a smile. Well, it's not like you've been returning my calls and mind links lately. She had been calling him incessantly these past few days, and each time, Ronan had blatantly hung up on her right in front of me. I've been busy, Ronan said, rubbing his temples as if to ward off a headache. I've been transferring everything to Anastasia lately. Why don't you head home for now? We can catch up later. Upon hearing that, my sister's eyebrows furrowed. What do you mean? Ronan closed his eyes tightly and sighed. I surrendered the Alpha title to Anastasia. The moment Adeline heard the truth, she was so shocked to the point that for a second, her facade faded. She eyed me with so much jealousy and hatred, one that I knew she always felt towards me. Then again, after a minute, she composed herself and acted like everything was fine. But I knew her better. I knew that she hated the fact that I now had a title and a power. She was not so easily dismissed. She walked over to the table where I was seated, her eyes glinting with something dark. She picked up the silverware Ronan had left behind and smiled sweetly, though the malice in her gaze was clear. Well, I happen to be famished. Mind if I join you two for dinner, Anastasia? Oops, Alpha? Her tone was innocent, but the challenge in her eyes was unmistakable. She was testing me, pushing my limits, trying to provoke a reaction. But I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. I'm afraid I do mind, I replied coolly, not bothering to look up from my meal. Your presence is rather nauseating. Her smile faltered, and for a moment I saw the uncertainty flicker across her face. She glanced nervously at Ronan, clearly expecting him to come to her defense. But to her shock, he nodded in agreement. Beta Magnus will take you home, Ronan said, his tone dismissive. Adeline's eyes widened in disbelief, her cheeks flushing with anger and humiliation. But she knew better than to argue, with one last glare in my direction. She turned on her heel and left the place, the door slamming shut behind her. The room was silent for a moment. Ronan hesitated, clearly trying to find the right words. Finally, he spoke. Anastasia, nothing is going on between me and her, he began, his eyes pleading. If it weren't for her pleading with your parents to save me when I was a kid, I might not be here today. I looked up at him, genuinely surprised. I could not believe it. All this time, he was fooled into believing those lies. This idiot didn't even hesitate to believe Adeline. He didn't even question her. Of course, she would do everything to ruin my happiness. She even lied about things like that. As long as you're willing, Ronan continued, his voice soft, I'll announce our marriage at the Alpha Gathering banquet in a few days. His eyes were filled with a depth of emotion as he gazed at me. Anastasia, please give me another chance. Let me marry you. I'll give you the grand wedding you deserve. You'll become my wife and the alpha of our pack. His words hung in the air, a promise of the life we could have had, the life I had once dreamed of, but the pain of the past, the loss of Kieran, was too much to bear. There was no going back. I still attended the Alpha Gathering banquet. Despite the tension simmering beneath the surface, taking over my pack had left me in desperate need of connections, resources, and allies. This gathering was my chance to secure what I needed, but I knew it wouldn't be easy, especially with him here. As I arrived at the grand ballroom, I saw Ronan at the center of attention, effortlessly drawing everyone into his orbit with his confident smile and sharp gaze. Everyone still thought he was the alpha of Obsidian Howl, and I could see how he thrived on their admiration. Yet there was an air of impatience about him as his eyes scanned the crowd, searching for someone specific. Then his gaze locked onto me. A spark of recognition lit up in his eyes, and with fluid grace, he maneuvered through the crowd toward me. Anastasia. Alpha, he greeted me in a voice that was both smooth and possessive. I knew you'd come. He reached out, gently taking my hand as if it were his right, leaning in close enough that his breath tickled my ear. I'll announce to everyone later that you're the only woman I want to marry, that you are my mate and the true alpha of our pack. Once, I would have been over the moon to hear those words from him. I had craved his acknowledgement, his love, his gaze upon me as if I was the only one who mattered. But now those words felt hollow, irrelevant. His sudden affection, his desperation, it was all too little, too late. I yanked my hand free, narrowing my eyes at him. Don't be ridiculous, Ronan. I'm not here for you. His eyes darkened with confusion, his expression turning from confident to puzzled. Don't be coy, Anastasia. If you're not here for me, then who are you here for? Before I could respond, a man with a wine glass approached, interrupting our exchange. Alpha Ronan, who might this be? He asked with an easy smile, his curiosity piqued. Ronan smirked, his hand sliding around my waist as if to stake his claim. My mate, soon to be my wife. I stiffened, the weight of his arm around me feeling more like a shackle than a comfort. I turned to the stranger, my voice firm. I am not. Ronan sighed, a helpless smile playing on his lips as he looked at the man. She's just playing hard to get. The man laughed, clearly amused. Someone dares to play around with Alpha Ronan? You'll need to sweeten her up, Alpha. My anger simmered beneath the surface, threatening to boil over. The stranger was oblivious to the fact that Ronan was no longer the Alpha, and I could tell that Ronan wasn't about to correct him. The deception irritated me, but I had bigger problems to deal with. As soon as the man left, I turned to Ronan, my voice cold. Is this amusing to you, Ronan? Playing these games? We're over. His grip on my arm tightened, and he leaned in closer, his breath hot against my ear. Amusing? No, Anastasia. Now that you're here, I'm not letting you go. Finally, a reprieve came in the form of Beta Magnus, who called Ronan away for something urgent. The moment he was gone, I breathed a sigh of relief, feeling the tension ease from my shoulders. But my relief was short-lived. As I turned around, I caught sight of Adeline standing in the corner of the room, her eyes locked onto me with intensity. Ronan's usual companion at gatherings like these, Adeline was as stunning as she was dangerous, her beauty hiding the venomous nature beneath. Her piercing gaze was filled with malice, her lips curled into a sneer. The grand hall buzzed with the mingling of alphas and their lunas, yet the tension between us created an invisible bubble that no one else seemed to notice. So he brought you along, she said with thinly veiled contempt. I didn't come with him, I replied, my voice steady. But Adeline dismissed my words with a sharp wave of her hand. Why you? She hissed, her voice laced with bitterness. What makes you so special, Anastasia? Why does everyone adore you? Why do you excel at everything you do? Why does all the attention gravitate toward you? Why did Mother choose you over me? And why did our father give you the pack instead of me? But it doesn't matter, she continued, her eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. Ronan will always be mine. I furrowed my brow, trying to make sense of the hatred radiating from her. When our parents ended their mate bond in marriage, it was our mother who had insisted on keeping both of us children. Adeline had been the one to choose to follow our father to another pack, seeking a life of luxury. Her bitterness, her jealousy, it made no sense to me. "You're insane," I muttered, shaking my head. She scoffed, her lips twisting into a cruel smile. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Ronan will always be mine." I met her gaze head-on, refusing to back down. "So confident. Are you? Is that why you lied to him, telling him you were the one who convinced our father to adopt him?" Her expression faltered for just a moment, a flicker of surprise flashing in her eyes. But she quickly regained her composure, her smirk returning with a vengeance. "Yes, I lied to him," she acknowledged, her tone dripping with venom. "So what? Go ahead and tell him that you were the one who saved him. Let's see who he believes, me, the woman he adores, or you, the one who's only ever been an obstacle." I swirled the wine in my glass, considering her words. Adeline had always been a master manipulator, bending the truth to suit her needs. But this was different. This was a betrayal on a level that Ronan wouldn't easily forgive. Especially not when it came to the truth about his past. "What do you think his reaction would be?" I began slowly. "If I told him that not only did you lie to him, but also that you considered him filthy and prevented our parents from adopting him?" Panic flickered in her eyes again, this time more pronounced. For a brief moment, I saw the fear beneath her bravado, the knowledge that her lies could unravel everything she had built. But then she straightened, her confidence returning. "It doesn't matter. Mother is dead, and our alpha of a father never liked you or Ronan. He'll only side with me. Who's left to back you up?" The air was thick with the mingling scents of wolves from different regions, each distinct and telling of their rank, lineage, and power. Meanwhile, I remained non-committal, unwilling to engage or acknowledge Adeline and Ronan's presence any longer. It was pointless to waste energy on them, let them lock themselves away in their delusions. I had more pressing matters to attend to. Tonight was about making connections and forging alliances that would benefit me and my pack. There was no room for distractions. As the evening unfolded, Ronan's name was called, and he confidently stepped onto the stage. His aura commanded attention, as it always had, and the crowd's murmurs quieted in anticipation. "Thank you all for supporting and aiding the Obsidian Howl Pack all this time," he began, his voice smooth yet firm. "I also have some exciting news to share." His eyes found mine across the room, locking onto me with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. Was he really planning to arrange the marriage he wanted now? He must have gone insane. Regarding my marriage with my mate. He trailed off, his words hanging in the air like a dark cloud ready to burst. Before I could fully process the implications of his speech, Adeline's hand squeezed mine. Her eyes sparkled with malice as she leaned in close, her voice dripping with mock concern. "Tell me, Anastasia, if you and I were both hurt, who would Ronan choose?" She didn't give me a chance to respond. Instead, with a sudden yank, she pulled me forward, straight into the towering champagne glasses that had been artfully arranged at the edge of the stage. The crystal clattered to the ground, shattering around us in a cascade of glass and liquid. I felt the sharp sting of shards slicing into my skin as we both fell, our bodies hitting the cold marble floor. Adeline's cry of pain pierced the air, and just as expected, Ronan was at her side in an instant. His voice boomed over the crowd as he lifted her gently from the ground. "What happened?" His tone was frantic, filled with a protectiveness. Adeline clung to him, her hand covering the blood seeping from her wounds. "Don't blame Anastasia," she whimpered, casting a pitiful glance in my direction. "She must be upset about losing Kieran." My heart clenched at the mention of my son. A shard of glass had lodged deep into my leg, but the pain was nothing compared to the anger building inside me. I gritted my teeth and pushed myself up, ignoring the warmth of blood running down my leg. Without a second thought, I grabbed a nearby piece of glass and hurled it at Adeline, my vision blurred with rage. Ronan, always her knight in shining armor, blocked the glass with his arm, shielding her from my attack. His eyes, once filled with warmth for me, now glared with fury. "Enough!" he snarled. "I know you're upset lately, but is that any reason to take it out on Adeline?" My anger worsened at his words, so easily swayed by her lies. The man I once loved, the father of my child, stood before me, completely under her spell. In his arms, Adeline looked up at me, a smirk playing on her lips. It was a look that said, "See? He'll always choose me." But instead of lashing out further, I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that made Adeline's confidence falter. From my dress pocket, I pulled out my phone, holding it up for everyone to see. Ronan's brow furrowed, but I could see the curiosity spark in the eyes of those around us. I tapped the screen, turned up the volume, and played the recording I had saved just for this moment. Adeline's voice rang out, clear and undeniable. Yes, I lied to him. The crowd stirred, whispers spreading like wildfire. I watched as Adeline's smirk faded, her face draining of color. Tell me, if you and I were both hurt, who would Ronan choose? Ronan's face was a portrait of disbelief, his eyes wide as the damning recording played through my phone. The room, once filled with celebration, now hummed with tension. Adeline, her face twisted in panic, lunged for the phone, her fingers reaching desperately. Anastasia, how could you set me up like this? She demanded, her voice a high-pitched wail. I sidestepped her frantic grasp, my heart racing with a mixture of relief and fury. Wasn't I forced into this by you? I retorted, my voice icy and unforgiving. On the other hand, Ronan, snapping back from his stunned silence, shoved Adeline with such force that she tumbled onto the shards of broken glass scattered across the floor. Her scream of agony was a sharp, piercing cry that cut through the murmurs of the crowd. The guests, wide-eyed and horrified, could only watch as the scene unfolded. Ignoring the pain of her new injuries, Adeline clawed at Ronan's pant leg, her voice rising in desperate, broken pleas. It's not what it looks like, Ronan. I can explain. I loved you so much, but you all chose her. I was just desperate to keep you. Without a second glance, Ronan kicked her away, his face a mask of cold resolve. Adeline fell again among the shards, her injuries now more severe. The situation had spiraled beyond her control, her desperation evident in every anguished cry. Ronan, she cried out, her voice cracking, you promised to treat me well for the rest of our lives. Why are you doing this to me? Ronan's gaze finally settled on her, his expression hardening. The kindness I extended was because someone once saved me, he said, his voice steady. But that person was never you. Turning away from her, Ronan approached me, his concern etched in every line of his face. I'm sorry, Anastasia. Are you all right? He asked, reaching out to help me. I recoiled from his touch, my anger surging. Don't touch me. I snapped. The sight of him, so desperate and broken, only solidified my resolve that he was not worth my suffering. Before Ronan could respond, a new figure emerged from the crowd. Alpha Atlas, his presence commanding and regal, swept in and lifted me into his arms with an effortless grace. His deep, velvety voice carried a carefree amusement. How did you grow up with such miserable people? He asked. His words, though lightly spoken, brought a fresh wave of tears to my eyes. The air between us crackled with a strange energy. My human senses had always been drawn to his undeniable charisma, but now, something more profound stirred within me. My wolf, restless and agitated, howled in longing. It was as if my wolf had grown tired of waiting for me to end my connection with Ronan. It yearned for Atlas's presence, drawn irresistibly to his scent, a rich, earthy aroma tinged with the sharp tang of pine and the faintest hint of wild musk. Atlas's scent was intoxicating, a potent mix that stirred something deep within me. His eyes, a striking blue flecked with gold, held a glint that spoke of power and dominance. His wolf was an imposing force, an alpha whose mere presence commanded respect and submission from other wolves. Despite his reputation of being unapproachable, my wolf was unabashedly attracted to him, eager to be close to his formidable aura. It was a contrast to Ronan, whose presence had become a dull ache of disappointment. I had heard that Alpha Atlas was nearly impossible to match, his wolf so dominant and fierce that lesser wolves would bow down or retreat in fear. Yet here I was, my wolf leaping at the chance to be near him. Ronan's voice broke through the haze of my thoughts. You have no right to hold Anastasia. Let her go. His anger was palpable as he advanced on Atlas, his fists clenched in a futile attempt to confront him. Alpha Atlas turned his gaze back to Ronan, his expression cool and challenging. And you do. His voice was a low, dangerous purr. Suddenly, realization dawned on Ronan. What the hell did you do? Why can't I feel my connection with my mate anymore? Did you steal my mate away? You motherfucker. His words were a thunderclap in the room, causing gasps of shock to ripple through the crowd. His accusations hung heavy in the air. The truth was, Atlas hadn't stolen me, it was our wolves who had chosen each other, a natural progression that had come from years of neglect and dissatisfaction. My wolf had been searching for a true alpha's protection, and now, with Atlas's powerful presence, it had found what it craved. I couldn't bear the sight of Ronan any longer. Ronan, just go. Get lost, I said, my voice firm. Ronan stood frozen, his eyes wide with shock. He had not expected me to side with Atlas, and the realization seemed to shatter something inside him. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving the room in stunned silence. Alpha Atlas carried me back to the Obsidian Howlpack's infirmary, where my wounds were treated with care. The day after, Adeline became the subject of ridicule and scorn throughout the entire continent. Meanwhile, Ronan stood vigil every night outside the pack house. I eventually had to expel him from my life entirely, giving him his belongings and the wealth he had amassed over the years. Despite my efforts, he persisted in his attempts to reach me. One night, after another visit from Alpha Atlas, I encountered Ronan at the pack's border. He kneeled in front of me. He had lost significant weight, his once vibrant demeanor now gone. "Anastasia, I'm sorry," he pleaded, his voice ragged with exhaustion. "I've seen Adeline's true colors. I won't give her any more opportunities to be near us or contact her again. And I'm so sorry about Kieran." The news of Adeline's downfall and the subsequent shunning in high society had reached me, painting a clear picture of her humiliation. "It's all irrelevant to me now, Ronan," I said, my voice steady despite the tears that brimmed in my eyes. "I don't care what happens between you two or what lies ahead for you." Tears welled in his eyes as he continued to beg. "Do you really not want me anymore? Please, Anastasia, don't leave me. What can I do to make you forgive me?" I looked at him, my heart too stoned to feel anything. "We will never go back, Ronan. Seeing you reminds me of Kieran. I could forgive you only if you could bring Kieran back to life." A wave of despair crashed over Ronan, extinguishing the light that had once flickered so brightly in his eyes. His shoulders sagged, and his expression saddened. I, on the other hand, was far from sympathetic. "If you need to cry, do it far away from me," I snapped, my irritation barely contained. "I get irritated just seeing you." It was maddening how, despite my clear declaration that I wanted nothing more to do with him, Ronan persisted in his attempts to insert himself into my life. He inundated my office in the pack with flowers and jewelry. He even extended his attempts to win over the pack members, showering them with favors and attempting to ingratiate himself. Meanwhile, Alpha Atlas took note of Ronan's every move, spared no effort in surpassing Ronan's gestures, hosted lavish feasts every night, bestowed gifts upon the elders, and ensured the safety of the territory. Meanwhile, Ronan's efforts overwhelmed me in a bad way to the point where I seriously considered leaving everything behind, and the constant reminder of Ronan, with his never-ending presence, made it nearly impossible to move on from the pain of losing Kieran. Fortunately, Atlas offered me refuge in his pack. During my time away, Beta Magnus would oversee the Obsidian Howl Pack's affairs. Ronan's reaction to this news was immediate and frantic. He rushed over, his face a mask of desperation. "Anastasia, are you really going with that bastard? Is it because I've been bothering you?" His voice cracked with anguish. "I won't bother you anymore, I promise. Just don't go with him, okay?" But why would I listen to him? Even after I had my vacation at Atlas's pack, Ronan's efforts did not wane. He used every connection he had to gain entry into gatherings, where he made frequent concessions to me. Whether these were acts of compensation or guilt was unclear. When I returned to the Obsidian Howl, my focus was on strengthening our pack. I forged alliances with Atlas's pack and other powerful factions he introduced me to. Months later, fate threw me into another encounter with Ronan. He confronted me with a mixture of anger and confusion. "Why are you still with him?" he demanded, pointing at Alpha Atlas who sat across the table. Alpha Atlas chuckled, his eyes twinkling with a dangerous blend of amusement and challenge. "What's it to you?" Ronan's gaze then turned to me, his eyes pleading for an explanation that I was reluctant to provide. The weight of his despair was evident, but I had long since moved past caring. Reaching into my purse, I retrieved a formal invitation and handed it to him. "I'm getting married next month," I said, my tone clipped. "You're welcome to attend. And by the way, we're now mated." The invitation seemed to shatter whatever remained of Ronan's composure. His eyes filled with tears, and his voice trembled with a mixture of hurt and disbelief. "You're marrying him? What about me? We were mated, so what am I to you now?" His questioning was absurd, especially considering he had shown no interest in the mateship ceremony when it mattered. To me, that chapter of my life was nothing more than a distant memory. Alpha Atlas's expression darkened, a sneer curling his lips. "You're nothing more than her sucked former mate who doesn't measure up. Now get lost." Ronan had always been convinced that I was hopelessly in love with him, that my anger and rejection were just fleeting tantrums. He thought I could be easily pacified, but as he watched me in my wedding gown, exchanging vows with Alpha Atlas at a lavish ceremony, the reality of my departure hit him with full force. His pleas went unheard as I stood resolute beside my new mate. Alpha Atlas held my hand, his gaze steady and affectionate. A playful smile curved my lips as I looked up at him. With a boyish grin that softened his otherwise intimidating presence, Atlas took my hand and kissed the back of it. I've been waiting for this moment for so long, my Luna. Today's story is over. Thank you all for listening.